study conducted for the Department for Business Innovations and Skills in 2014 states that employer wellbeing is an increasing focus of government attention in the UK and worldwide. The study begins to fill the gap in gathering evidence on the relationship between employee wellbeing and performance in the UK. It shows that there is considerable evidence in the correlation between employee wellbeing and job performance. In their article in 2014, Nixon and Spector explained that technological developments are altering the nature of work life, impacting how, when, and where we work. Information and communication technologies allow us to work from remote locations while still keeping in touch with the office and colleagues. The sophistication and speed of collaborative work has also greatly increased with the help of technology. Along with these changes, we must update our understanding on how employees' health, stress, and well-being are affected. Is workers' well-being linked to performance? Is technology the key to improving employee productivity, or is it becoming just another stressor? How do we find the right balance in the way we use technology? We will begin the discussion around all these questions in the webinar, and I'd like to hand over to Donald in a brief introduction before I do so. Donald is a reader at the School of Business and Economics at Loughborough University, where he has worked for almost 10 years, and where he is director of the Centre for Professional Work and Society. The experience of home-based and mobile workers is one of Donald's central research interests. His research in this area focuses on two specific overlapping themes: the extent to which business people work while travelling on work-related journeys, and the way in which mobile computer and communication technologies are used in these work activities. I shall hand you over to Donald.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you for about 15 minutes about the contradictory impact of mobile technology use for mobile and home-based workers. So the overarching focus of the webinar is about technology in the modern workplace, and I'm looking at very specific technologies and very specific workplaces. So in terms of the images on the screen here, the type of technologies I'm interested in are mobile technologies, contemporary mobile technologies, tablet computers, laptops, smartphones. And one of the innovations of these technologies compared to previous generations of mobile technology is they provide access to email on the move. And that's a potentially quite significant change. So I'm going to look at the impact of using these technologies primarily on well-being rather than issues of performance. So it talks about, the title talks about the modern workplace, and for me the first thing to think about is what is the workplace like? What is the modern workplace like? And I think the technologies we're talking about have facilitated a number of changes in the contemporary workplace. For more and more people, the workplace isn't just a static office. People might work at home full-time or part-time, so working at home 2 days a week or 1 day a week, working in the office the rest of the time, etc. Or, as some of the images suggest, people who have to travel regularly for work, and research suggests more and more people have to regularly undertake business journeys to visit clients, to visit different sites of their employers, etc. And modern technologies facilitate working on the move. So you might be at a hotel, you might be in your car, you might be at the airport. If you've got a smartphone in your pocket, etc., that means you can still keep in touch with phone calls, with email, etc. So if you're a mobile worker, the workplace might be any of these locations, even if you're just passing through them very briefly. So I'm interested in the impact of modern technology use on these type of workers, people who work partly at home and people who work on the move. And the key thing to sort of suggest is the impact on workers of these excuse me, the impact on workers of these technologies is paradoxical and contradictory. So to define what I mean, probably the Escher drawing is probably a good illustration. A paradox is a statement in two parts, which when you combine them is contradictory, irreconcilable. So in the Escher drawing, the stairs are simultaneously going up and going down. Now, logically that's not possible, but in the diagram that's what's happening. The stairs are simultaneously going up and down, And in terms of mobile technology use for workers, the consequences, the impacts for workers are paradoxical. They're simultaneously good and simultaneously bad. So I'm going to try and sort of illustrate this by talking about a study that was done a couple of years ago by some American academics. On this slide, there's some quotations, interview quotations that were taken by workers using these technologies. The red italicized quotes are the quotations. I'm not going to read out these quotations to you. I'm going to just leave these quotations up so you can read the quotations yourself. I'm going to talk about the themes in the quotations. So, Masmanian did a study of BlackBerry use in one US company. So it was quite a detailed, in-depth case study. And they came up with this idea of the autonomy paradox. So for the workers that were studied, people's initial experiences of having BlackBerries was very positive, very good. It created a sense of autonomy for them. So as the sort of quote suggests, people no longer felt stuck working in the office. If you had a BlackBerry, that meant you could leave the office, you could go home and work from home, or you could work from other locations. And to start with, people also felt they had control. The second quote suggests that you might be able to check your messages, but that doesn't compel you to respond. So it seemed to provide people with autonomy to check messages and respond where appropriate. But over time, this sense of autonomy changed quite significantly. And what happened was, after a period of months, people felt that their autonomy was becoming increasingly constrained. They felt compelled to constantly check their messages. Because people knew they had BlackBerries, they felt under pressure to be constantly checking messages, no matter what they were doing, no matter where they were. So as the bottom quote suggests, you might be sitting in a meeting face to face with other people, but people still felt compelled to be checking their BlackBerry for emails. So sitting in meetings, checking their phone, etc. Or spending time at home with the family and feeling a compulsion to check messages. So gradually people felt their autonomy was becoming reduced. As the title of the slide suggests, things went from the sort of anytime, anywhere logic where they had autonomy and flexibility to this more pernicious logic of every time, everywhere, and people felt compelled over time to be constantly checking their messages. So that slide suggests that that the consequences are simultaneously good and bad of using these technologies. And what I want to do for the next couple of slides is sort of separate out these positives and negatives to look at them separately. So the benefits of these technologies for workers are spatio-temporal flexibility. So they provide the convenience to work where and when you want, potentially. So you're no longer stuck in the office. If you want to be doing email, you don't have to be in the office. You can be on a train, you can be sitting at home, etc. And for some people that's beneficial, that provides a lot of convenience. So as the quote at the bottom suggests, if you've got a family, you don't have to stay in the office to complete your work. You can come home, do whatever family commitments you have, and then potentially reconnect with work, once your children have gone to bed, etc. So potentially they offer flexibility and convenience to choose where and when people work. But simultaneously they have this negative, negative consequence. Masmanian talked about reduced autonomy. I would suggest there's probably two significant negative consequences of using these mobile technologies. The first one is where the work-life boundary becomes blurred, and it becomes increasingly difficult to separate work and non-work time. And this is fundamentally because work increasingly intrudes into non-work time. So if you have a mobile technology, if you have a smartphone, if you have a BlackBerry, etc., time spent with family, whether it's in the evening or at weekends or on holiday, people feel increasingly compelled to be checking for messages and listening to messages and responding to calls, etc. So the boundary, the distinction between personal time and work time becomes blurred. And secondly, there's a perceived need, related to the first point, there's a perceived need to constantly be responding to emails, calls, messages, and this idea of responding promptly. I think one thing that's been evolving in society is expectations of response time, and I think people feel when you have these technologies, and other people know you have these technologies, the expectation of quick response increases. So one of the reasons why people feel compelled to continually check is either they want to be able to respond promptly to a message. The concern would be if you don't respond promptly, if you don't check your device promptly, you might miss out on an urgent call, and people are kind of anxious to avoid that. So this idea of being online, always being online, checking for messages. Some academics use this concept of perpetual contact. Some talk about constant connectivity, but it's this idea that when you have a smartphone, when you have a BlackBerry, you need to be constantly checking it. First thing in the morning, last thing at night, when you go on holiday, etc. And these negative consequences, these negative features can have potentially negative impacts on workers and on workers' families. So this blurring of the work-life boundary, this sense of perpetual contact, in terms of individual workers, it can create stress, people not feeling they can ever disconnect from work, that they're constantly checking, so you can never switch off, and perceptions of overwork. You're always checking your email inbox, and you're anxious that your email inbox stays at a certain size, and the anxiety would be if you don't check your email constantly, you might end up being overwhelmed with the volume of emails. So people can become anxious about overwork due to the volume of emails they receive. And secondly, work-family conflict, particularly with the blurring of the boundary and the perception of needing to be online all the time. If you're a worker who has a family, a spouse, and you're constantly checking messages when you're at home, whether that's evenings, weekends, etc., that might result in conflict, disagreement with family members who think you shouldn't be checking your email at the dinner table, etc. So not just worker stress, but also work-family conflict. Now I want to the next slide gives an illustration of some of these issues based on another case study. So this study is another case study of a single organisation, a Canadian multinational, and it was looking at the impact of mobile ICT use, and they interviewed people before they adopted the technology, and they interviewed people after they adopted it to see how people's experiences had changed. And what they found was people's experiences were quite different. The main group, the one I've got at the top, they were labelled struggling segmentors, and that was more than half of the sample that was interviewed. Now, a segmentor is somebody whose preference in terms of work and life is to keep work and life separate. Conscious of time, to try and sort of draw my presentation to conclusion, on this slide, I think there's a contrast between the top quotation and the bottom two quotations. Now, the labels segmentor and integrator are about people's preference with regard to the work-life boundary. Segmentors are people who like to keep work and personal life separate, and they make a lot of effort to keep the two things distinct. Integrators are people who are happy to blend work and non-work time and space. So you might be at work, but you're happy to deal with family issues. You might be at home and you're happy to deal with work issues. In this study, the struggling segmentors blamed the technology. These were the struggling segmentors were people who found BlackBerry use didn't allow them to keep work and personal life separate. These people felt that when they had BlackBerries, the technology meant that they couldn't escape work. So when they were at home, they were having to deal with email, etc. So the struggling segmentors blamed the technology. If you look at the two quotes from the other categories, the segmentors and the integrators, these people had a much more positive experience. These people were able to use the technology, and it was able to support the type of boundary management style they liked. And these people said it's not the technology, it's up to human beings, it's up to users to control the technology. So there's a contrast between the two perspectives. One group blamed the technology, and the other two groups said, don't blame the technology, it's your responsibility to manage this boundary. So this sort of raises questions about the extent to which people can control this technology. And to sort of illustrate this, I've got a very brief video which sort of implies that people can become addicted to these technologies.
As you can see, this deal really doesn't make sense due to some ongoing manufacturing issues. Kevin, what do you think?
I say we go with it.
Okay, so a humorous video, that's not a real person or a real organisation, but it just sort of raises this question about people's ability to manage the technology. So as a conclusion, for me, there's three sort of points to summarise. Firstly, when we talk about the contemporary workplace, we have to see it as quite a diverse and evolving thing. It's not just the offices. People might work at home, people might work on the move, etc. The impacts of these technologies are paradoxical. They're simultaneously good and bad. And the last slide, the last bullet point, raises this question about how much power and how much autonomy workers have to control their use of these devices. Do we have power to manage the boundary and to switch these devices off, or does the technology itself make it difficult to do that? Okay, so just to leave that question hanging there, to what extent do workers have the ability to manage this boundary with these technologies? So I'll stop there, and there's a few minutes for questions.
Fantastic, thank you, Donald. Just to let everyone know, whilst I do a very brief summary, if you do have any questions for Donald, please do send those through and I'll make sure that we ask those. There has been a request for the link to the video. I think it's caused a lot of amusement and also opportunity to reflect as well. So to let people know that we will actually be recording and editing the webinar from today, and you'll have access to that within the next 36 hours on Maudsley Learning Online, our digital platform. I think from your first slide, Akun, very interesting, just simply talking about technology, about sort of accessing work anytime and anywhere, becoming every time and everywhere. And I think the sort of comedic value of the video reinforced that. But also, as you say, everybody's quite different, and that's reinforcement of work from Jeff around the sort of work-life balance boundary, whether you're an integrator, a segmenter, or a struggling segmenter. I've got a question that's just come through from Abdul. In terms of tech fit, what about NLP-wise? Some folks are more visual or tactile, I presume that means, or auditory. If we know our preference, we can encourage what works for us, what works for others. Any tools for this? Oh, I think that was for you. Thank you, Jeff. Any thoughts on that, Donald?
I'm not aware of any particular tools. I would agree with the point Jeff made that if people have particular communication preferences, the best thing to do is be explicit and to share those preferences before you engage in interaction. So if you don't like webcamming, or if you prefer instant messaging to email, etc., I think the best thing for people to do is to be explicit about communication styles, communication preferences.
So I'd like to introduce you to Jeff. Jeff Stish is a PhD at university. His thesis is about well-being and virtual interactions at work, and is supervised by Dr. Patrick Stacey, Professor Kerry Cooper, and Professor Monideepa Tarafta. His research interests gravitate around the psychological impact of technology on employees, covering areas such as technostress, telecommuting, virtual teams, and e-leadership. His articles on the future of work and technology were published in HR Magazine and won first and second prizes in journalism contests organised by Le Monde and Orange SA. So I'm hoping that Jeff is ready, slightly ahead of time, and can take the webinar forward.
Hopefully I'll be talking about some similar issues as well, so we'll be building up on what we say each other. My presentation is about attitudes toward technology. So what I mean by attitudes is all the subjectivity. Can be perceptions, it can be preferences for one technology over the other, it can be opinions. So I saw that many of you in the chat also shared some experiences they had with technology, some opinions they had on technology, or something they felt while using technology as well. So the purpose of my presentation is to show that this subjectivity is also impacting technology's impact, is influencing technology's impact on well-being and performance. I think Donald came back, so perhaps he can resume his presentation.
I think, Jeff, if we give you, I think Donald might have to reboot. I do think we all realise the challenges we're facing with the technology at this point.
Sorry, Donald.
I think Karen and Jeff, we'll listen to your presentation through to the end, and then we'll go back to Donald. My apologies.
Okay, that's fine. So attitudes toward technology. First question is, why should we care about attitudes? So here I just put two pictures up for debate. So on the right-hand side, we've got a picture of what I would say a friendly open space, people having a chat, sharing a cup of coffee, probably discussing about some work-related issue. Then on the left-hand side, we've got people really focused on their job, in trouble because the open space is very quiet, it's very good environment to focus and be focused on the task at hand. So here I just described these two pictures in a very positive way. But actually you can also describe it in the other way around. You can say that on the right hand side we've got people just making some noise in the open space, having coffee breaks all the time, very disturbing office environments. And on the left hand side you can say that people are just absorbed by the screens, lost in the virtual world, not talking to another, with their headphones on. So actually there are very different ways to go about these pictures, and everybody will be able perhaps to tell if they like one picture or the other, if they prefer to work in one environment or the other. This is what I wanted to say about subjectivity as well. We have some preferences, and these preferences might have some impact on how we use the technology and how we react to other people using the technologies as well. So it's based on some subjective conceptions as well. So the first way attitudes could impact is that they can impact outcomes. So there was this great paper from Barley saying that email has become both a source and a symbol of stress. So what he means by this is that email undoubtedly has created stress in itself because of some intrinsic properties of email. It's easiness to send, it's easiness to send anytime, anywhere. As well. So Donald started to talk a bit about the interruptions on the BlackBerry. You can check your emails. So this has become so easy that email created stress in itself. Well, what Barley says is that email has also become a symbol of stress, sometimes even a scapegoat. So we blame emails for lots of problems in the modern workplace as well. So we tend to say that everything that's wrong with office politics go through email, people copying the whole company to get covered, these kind of things. So it has become a scapegoat, perhaps to a too great extent. Perhaps it's not as stressful as it seems. Well, the point I'm trying to make here is that if it's a scapegoat, then it creates fear and it creates stress in its own, because stress is something very subjective. You might have all the conditions gathered for some event to be stressful. If the individual doesn't appraise the situation to be stressful, doesn't recognize the situation to be stressful, then it won't be. And if you project some perceptions on email, for example, then you make email also more stressful to individuals. So this will be something I will be talking about later on when I present results from my study. So same for ICT interruptions. It can influence outcomes. So the interruptions coming from information communication technology, Donald started to talk a bit about this as well. So they fragment attention, they irritate, but on the same time, individuals who enjoy multitasking, who view these interruptions positively, are less affected by these interruptions as well. On the contrary, individuals, what we say, are monochromatic. They like to focus on a single task at hand. These people are much more troubled by ICT interruptions as well. So the idea behind this is that personality and individual variables view somebody might have on one technology also influence the impact. And we see this as well in the use of ICT outside or beyond working hours, the use of BlackBerry. Donald was going to speak about. He mentioned work-life conflict as being a big outcome of the use of BlackBerries and ICT outside working hours. This work-life conflict is actually less troublesome for individuals who have a positive view on this 24/7 availability. People who view this constant connectivity positively suffer less from it as well. So again, there's this idea that preferences, values, attitudes, perceptions, subjectivity can mitigate or increase some outcomes of technology. Now, another thing about attitudes is that they can influence use. So there is one theoretical model we use sometimes called the technology acceptance model. So it's a very simple model saying that the more we like technology, the more we use it. So the more I like email, the more I use email. It's combined into if you perceive email to be easy to use and useful, then I have more positive attitudes toward email and I'll use it more. So kind of makes sense if I say it like this, theoretically. So here are some media that individuals consider to be important for business, obviously email, internet, phones, smartphones. So if you view this different media as positively or as business critical, then the technology acceptance models say that you will tend to use them more as well. And what Donald was talking a bit as well about the autonomy paradox. Problem with ICT outside working hours is that many people also ask for this, ask to get a BlackBerry. They ask their boss to have this constant connectivity. They ask to be remotely available. There was this study by Diaz and colleagues saying that sometimes they feel more empowered, more satisfied, more productive, more professional. So these are all outcomes that are partly influenced by the way people perceive the technology. If you perceive the BlackBerry to be empowering, if you feel like a businessman or professional, if you're on holidays and sealing some big deal on your smartphone, then you might also have more positive outcomes out of these. But you also tend to use it more and ask for this remote connectivity. So this is another way attitudes can influence outcomes. And now my own study is about when attitudes clash with demands. So as you remember, technology acceptance model, the more you like a technology, the more you use it. But obviously in the modern workplace, you don't always have the choice of the technology you want to use. So sometimes your own preferences can clash with the preferences of somebody else or preferences of the organization. So here, for example, I've got a quote from interviews I made last year in a French organization. So one individual said, I limit my phone calls a lot. I never call. I don't like the phone. I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't like it, and I don't like it either when I'm called. So obviously this person doesn't like a phone. So according to a technology acceptance model, it will call people less, but it doesn't mean that he will be called less, because other people might have different or even conflicting preferences. So this is a quote from another participant of my interviews, and he says the exact opposite. He says, I'm more of a phone person. I send an instant message with, hey, do you have a minute? And if they say yes, I call them straight away. So you can see from these two quotes that the preferences of one individual can clash with the preferences of another. So if you don't like a technology, you use it less, fine, but it doesn't mean that other people around you will be using it less as well. So I will analyze in a couple of slides the impact of these conflicting preferences on well-being and performance. But another point first is that your own preferences can clash with demands from above, I would say, or the demands from HR, for example. So it was small debate last year we had in France. So for some organizations in some industries, some trade unions have negotiated that some individuals might be able to disconnect after working hours. So I used a lot the word some because it was a very specific situation. But here, when I read about these stories from a UK perspective, because I'm studying in the UK, The Guardian titled, When the French Clock Off at 6 p.m. They Really Mean It, and relaxing in a French cafe and troubled by work emails. So there was this general perception that, oh, the evil email were banned in France. Nobody can send email beyond working hours. So there was this story. It was very surprising to see it from the UK perspective, or at least from the Guardian's perspective. So this is not really what happened, but I wanted to show you this example because there is an underlying debate we have in France between the right to disconnect versus the obligation to disconnect. So what trade unions want to do is a right to disconnect, saying that we must provide employees some kind of safeguard or something, so that if they want to disconnect, if they want to cut off from emails beyond working hours or not have a BlackBerry, they can do it. But as I was saying, sometimes it's difficult because if your other team members are using the BlackBerry, sending messages in your team, then you might feel left out as a result. So the question is, if there is a right to disconnect, will people use it? Is it any useful? Especially if some people are asking for this connectivity, then they might not use this right to disconnect. So there is the debate about should people to disconnect. Should we put an obligation to disconnect so people won't experience a work-life conflict because they won't be able to access this technology at home altogether? But then remember I said attitudes are important, perceptions are important. So if individuals perceive the BlackBerry to be something very powerful, very empowering, then they might feel very frustrated by this obligation as well, by these decisions imposed from bottom up. And there was some example 2 years ago as well with Yahoo and Hewlett Packard deciding to ban telework, so saying that we value a lot face-to-face interaction, so people must go home, go back to the office, interact face-to-face. So obviously you can imagine if you're somebody loving to telework, that's my case. You see, I'm in my home office here. So if my organization decide to ban telework, then I might be tempted to change organization, to change jobs, so increasing turnover intentions. So there is this idea as well that the preference also lead individuals to make career decisions as well. So this was another example of how your own preference might clash with those of the organization or other individuals. I just want to make a quick example of what we call email overload. So I guess everybody here is aware of what email overload is, feeling overwhelmed by email when you come Monday morning and you see all these emails having piled up during the weekends. So this is email overload. So this leads to loss of productivities, reduced task coordination, you're less able to focus as well on the primary tasks and when there is email pop-ups coming all the time. The thing is, how many emails are needed to feel overloaded? And that's a very difficult question because for some individuals it might be 200, for some it might be 10. 50, 100. So it really depends on the individual. And that's because email overload, just like stress, is a subjective appraisal. And within the definition of email overload, we see that it's a user's perception that their own email use has gotten out of control. So that's why from one individual to another, there might be very different threshold at which email overload is occurring. So one participant in my study, for example, said, I am not an email person very much, so I don't even like when there are a few of them. So this person might feel overloaded with just 10 emails maybe, whereas the next guy might be overloaded with 100. So that's the point I wanted to make with email overload. And actually email overload can be mitigated as well with a positive view towards email. So if you view email as a business critical tool, you see email as essential, then you will tend to feel less overloaded by email. Now, remember I said it's all about attitude, subjectivity, perceptions. So email overload is about having too much email. But you might imagine that some people hiding somewhere might also have too few emails. That's something I'm going to talk about in my study. So my study is about what I call a technology fit. So the fit between individuals and the technology. For example, a fit between your actual use of technology and your desired use of technology. To which extent do you use email versus to which extent would you like to use email? So this is one example of fit. Another example of fit is the fit between the preferences of several individuals in the team. So remember the example with the phone person I put forward before. The fit between individual and the technology required by this individual's job. Fit between individual and the organization. So this is the example with the right to disconnect, obligation to disconnect I mentioned before. Fit between past and present jobs. So if you were email overloaded in your previous job and not in your current job, then you might feel more satisfied as a result because you have achieved this state of fit. Now, going more precisely to my own study, I did a survey with 118 US workers from Qualtrics. So Qualtrics was a great online tool to do this study. And I asked several questions. I asked them about their actual use of electronic media and their desired use of electronic media. So how often do you use blah, blah, versus how often would you like to use this media? Then I asked as Wellbeing as well, using this tool by one of my supervisor, Carrie Cooper, called Assets. It's a great tool to do well-being audits, lots of different dimensions, very short, very practical. So I did this study, and the first result I'm going to show you is the link between actual volume of email versus stress coming from poor relationship with colleagues. So as you see in the axis on the bottom here, we've got the amount of emails. On the 8 axis, we've got stress coming from poor relationship with colleagues. And the thing is, when I mapped these two results together, I found absolutely nothing. So there was no link between the actual volume of email and stress coming from poor relationship with colleagues. So I was not able to say the more email, the more stress, or the less email, the less stress, or these kind of things. And you see this quite often in studies. They try to make a link between the technology and the outcome without considering the perception or the attitudes. So I tried as well, didn't work out. But hopefully I had another question, which was very useful. So in this graph here, I still have the same axis about actual volume of emails on the bottom. On the 8, I still have relationship stress. So it's the exact same as the graph before. But now in depth, I've got another axis, which is the desired volume of email. So I asked people, how much email do you have? And how much email would you like to have? And here we see the results three-dimensional. And it's getting more interesting because in this corner here, we've got people who have too many emails. So these are people who have very high actual volume of emails and very low desired volumes. So these people, you can see, have a very high level of relationship stress. So these are the people who are overloaded by email. But if you look at the opposite corner, stress is just as high, but these are for people who have too few email might seem surprising because you don't hear from these people much. But here you see people have very low actual volume of emails and very high desired volume. So they would like to use email much more than what they currently use in their organization, in their job. And these people are just as stressed as people from the opposite side. And as you can see in the diagonal here, these are people who have enough emails. So these might be people who interact a lot using emails, but are perfectly fine with it, or individuals who don't have any email at all and are perfectly fine with it as well. So these are the individuals who are less stressed because of poor relationships with colleagues. So you can see from this little study here, that's both too many and too few emails had impact on stress, and it really depended on individuals' perceptions on the matter as well. And stress was reduced when individuals were interacting the way they really wanted to. So just I want to finish with a couple of learnings and a little video to show you as well about this. First, I think it's about developing empathy, because I've got a quote here from one study. Somebody said, "I've been using this technology for a very long time. They have become so natural that it is sometimes hard for me to realize that they might not be as natural to others." So other people might have different preferences for different media, and sometimes it's hard to spot. And I've never heard of anybody asking to one colleague, "Hey, which media do you like? Do you like me to contact you through the phone or email?" I never ask anybody, I never heard anybody asking these kind of questions as well. So I think it's also about sharing your own preferences and adapting the medium to the person as well. So it's perfectly fine to ask people, which media do you prefer, which technology do you prefer, and then try to adapt your own use of the media so that you don't create misfit or you don't create stress for individuals. And on the same time, it's perfectly fine to share your own preferences. So if you hate the phone, just say straight out, "Listen, I don't really like the phone very much. Can you just come to my office? We have a chat face to face, or can you just drop me an email?" So this dialogue, I think, is often forgotten in organizations, and we don't often share our own preferences or our own subjectivity around these things. And some individuals might have even bigger responsibility. For example, managers might act as a role model as well, and might try to foster this kind of discussion around their subordinates. So this is one way to go about, I would say, from an individual level, sharing your preferences, asking for the preferences of others, and adapting your medium of choice as a consequence. Then another thing is changing perceptions. So you're probably aware, if you want to change the volume of emails or the volume of media, then that's very easy. You can just ban people, prevent them from using it, or introduce a new technology. And so adjusting the actual volume is something very easy, but adjusting the subjectivity requires different techniques. So there is one technique to adjust perceptions that has been tried in an organization. It has been called the No Internal Emails Week, or No Emails After Work Week. So this is a fun and engaging experiment you can do in a small team or a small organization to make people change a bit the perception. So I just want to show you a small video with my supervisor, Skari, and then I talk about it a bit more.
We have a number of rules. From noon today, all internal emails will be banned for the rest of the week. So you'll have to communicate eyeball to eyeball, face to face with all your colleagues. No texts, calls, emails, anything at all to do with work after hours. This should be a fun week. Let's try to get our life back.
So for the next 5 days, internal emails are banned, and there's a curfew on working outside of the office.
It's been a good atmosphere this week. People have talked to each other more.
Actually, I've come in a couple of days and had no emails, no new emails.
It has really helped me get to know my colleagues a lot more.
I quite often will go on the internet just before I go to bed, whether it's on my phone or my laptop, and I think not doing that has meant that I've slept better this week.
All the technology interference, the emails within the business, I think has overloaded people. And actually reducing that has produced, I think, really positive results in this work environment.
Yeah, so this was the short video. So I wanted to show you this because this experiment, very engaging experiment by Carey, has been reproduced in research as well with powerful outcomes on perceptions, because it's difficult to imagine what would be a workplace without emails. We say we want less emails, but what do we know about working without emails? So this is why some organization might introduce this day without email, or alpha day, or even week without internal emails. The purpose of which is to adjust perceptions. So if you work in this non-email week, then you know what it's like to work without emails. You know the advantages of it, but you also see what you're losing in the process. So your perceptions become more accurate as a result, because you see what you're missing, and then you can adjust your perceptions accordingly. So this is one engaging experiment that can be done as well. So this was for my presentation. As you probably noticed, I just wanted to raise awareness about the importance of attitude and subjectivity in influencing technology's outcome. So thank you very much. And if you want to get in touch with me, you'll see all my contact details on my website. You can use any media you want. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Jeff. Fascinating. I had no idea that too few emails might cause stress. I think the points that you make around style of work, cultural side of things, as well as the perception of technology, ease of use, usefulness, very relevant, particularly I think in the context of a sort of 4th-generation workplace that we all work within. I'm just inviting really the audience to send any questions through that you may have, and then we will go back to Donald. Just want to pick up a couple of points while those questions come through for you, Jeff. I thought there was a very good comment by Richard that suggests that people should talk to each other as a way of finding out what their personal preference is. So Jeff, because of the sort of personal style, the perceptions, the cultural side of things, do you think that this means that organizations should provide a clear, simple framework for technology use to avoid conflict, stress, and other negative outcomes?
Yeah, definitely. That could be a solution as well, or at least something that might help tackling these problems. If you provide frameworks or guides that encourage these sort of discussions or roundtables, or that might also encourage people to not impose their own views onto others, especially managers. This is something that can definitely have an impact on reducing the misfit technology might create.
We've got a question that's just come through from Nikki. Jeff, could you tell me what the term is for needing to get rid of emails dealing with them? Something like zero inbox.
Yeah, exactly. That's a zero inbox. But it can be a tricky thing, because if you want to really delete all the emails as they come, or sort them in different categories, it can be troublesome as well, because one study showed that the more email folders you have, the more email overloaded you might feel, because then might be difficult as well to retrieve all the information you need. And then you might even be even more stressed by trying to achieve this zero inbox state, and just dealing with the emails as they come. So it can be very tricky. It depends on your own skills and your own personality as well, how you want to deal with it. If you feel less stressed with the zero inbox, then go for it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. It's the 3rd conference that we have produced. It's one day for HR and wellbeing practitioners, and it'll cut through the rhetoric and explore how we can affect change within teams and organisations. We'll be using a group construct to find creative solutions that can be applied in the day-to-day running of businesses in our Wellbeing Cafe, learn about resilience, technology and design for employee wellbeing, discuss parallels from practices in defence, and explore the human factor and its devastating impact in the Germanwings flight accident. We will have expert insights, compelling case studies and interactive sessions, and so together we will explore how employee wellbeing can be managed and enable environment for disruptive conversations. You will see the really hopeful learning outcomes on your screen as we speak, and there's also a link below which will give you a detail of the agenda and all the subject matter experts that will be speaking. And also, as you can see, there is a discount code that is valid until the 30th of November, which will give you the opportunity to have 42% off our delegate passes. Anyway, thank you all very much for dialing in. Our apologies for the technical glitch. Hopefully you appreciate the irony of that. I hope you found it of value, and that you can access this in your own time within the next 36 hours when it goes up on our digital platform, Morty Learning Online. Thank you again to Jeff and Donald, and we look forward to welcoming you soon. Thank you.